It's allowing me to. That's, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, just waiting for it to load. But yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Keith, and thank you for the invitation, Paul. It's fantastic to share the project and the story. Sorry, just waiting for it to, yeah, it's in presentation mode now, it should be. All right. Yes, so yeah, this white-winged flufftail, it's a very rare species, and highly threatened. It is a habitat specialist, and I'll be sharing a bit more about the habitat that it represents for the conservation work that we do. Yeah, so this talk is comprises two parts. Part one is sort of the project vision, a sort of introduction, but also the sort of approach and philosophy that we take. What is this flagship model that we try to adopt? And then the second part will go into the project objectives. Right, so the white-winged flufftail is one of 9 flufftail species endemic to sub-Saharan Africa. So flufftails are only found in Africa, and that includes Madagascar as well. But this particular species has these diagnostic white secondary flight feathers. And if you're fortunate enough to see the bird in a wetland, that's all you'll get a glimpse of, is a white flash, and then it will disappear into the sedge meadow. Very typical of what's behind me in my background. The bird is very cryptic in its behavior, which gives it that rarity, but also really poses a massive challenge to actually understanding the bird and its ecology, which really hinders our conservation efforts. So a lot of our work is focused in trying to better understand the biology of the bird to inform conservation. It breeds in high elevation wetlands during the summer months, and it's found along the eastern escarpment of South Africa. I'll have a map showing you exactly where that is. But it's quite a big mystery. There's a lot of mysteries around this bird. The call was only described in 2020. We only had the first breeding record of the bird in 2018 in South Africa. So there's a lot we don't know. And one of the big mysteries as well is where it overwinters. We have no idea where the bird goes during the winter months. It is a wetland specialist, preferring intact sedge mixed meadows with shallow water. And so the bird very much is a representative of a healthy, functioning wetland ecosystem. It is also globally critically endangered, one step away from becoming extinct in the wild. And so this is very concerning for us, and that's why we're putting so much effort in trying to conserve the white-winged flufftail. But why is the white-winged flufftail so threatened? Well, it's because of destruction and degradation of its wetland habitat. This is an assessment of South Africa's habitats and ecosystems, and they found that wetlands, along with estuaries, which is a type of wetland, is the most threatened and unprotected ecosystem type in the country. And that's not just unique to South Africa, it's a global issue. Our wetlands face a lot of pressure around the world. Well, why does it matter? Why should we be investing and putting so much time in trying to conserve the white-winged flufftail? Well, by conserving habitat for the white-winged flufftail, these wetlands, we are also conserving a host of ecosystem services that are provided not only to local communities, but also people living downstream of these wetlands. So the bird is situated in these high elevation wetland systems in our upper catchments, and everyone, all from the top of the catchment to the ocean, benefits from these wetlands because of the link of water. And these are just some of those ecosystem services that they provide. A lot of regulating, supporting, provisioning, and cultural services. In fact, wetlands sequester more carbon than any other ecosystem type in the world, more than rainforests. So it's really important that we try to conserve these systems. So exactly what is the wetlands that we are talking about? I didn't know exactly what kind of wetlands were that white-winged flufftail were inhabiting when I started at this project. It's essentially these shallow waters where soils are saturated, and you can see just this rolling sedge meadow, or sedge mixed with grass, mixed with herb. And this is where the bird sort of inhabits. It's using the understory of these wetland systems to avoid predators and complete most of its life cycle during the breeding season. And that's why it's also hard to see. because the bird doesn't readily flush and you cannot see it in the open. And yeah, if you're standing in the wetland and you're looking down, that's essentially white-winged flufftail habitat. You see that shallow water, you can pretend that it's moving around almost like a rodent would in between all the sedges, and that's how it avoids predation and yeah, where it completes its life cycle, as I say. And in there is a hotspot of biodiversity. There's flowers, there's what invertebrates, which we're also studying and looking at to try and understand the bird's needs. But yeah, that's where it lives its life. So the approach we take, as I say, is a flagship species. So the white-winged flufftail is a representation of a healthy, functioning wetland ecosystem. And in order to conserve wetlands, we try to take this multi-pronged approach. So I'll be presenting on each of these little topics and some of the projects that we're doing. I'll only be presenting on the recent projects we've done and those we plan in the future. We've accomplished a lot more, which we're very grateful for. Right, so yeah, project objectives. And this is a beautiful photo I caught in one of the first years on a camera trap. So that's how we study the bird, is using motion detected cameras in the wetland and also acoustic devices now that the call has been described. And you can see the male displaying those white secondary flight feathers. So first, wetland management. It became quite apparent when I started this position at BirdLife South Africa that there was, the destruction of wetlands is quite obvious, but a more subtle threat is degradation. And that's just simply as a result of not understanding how wetlands work. They are very complex ecosystems with water interacting with the geology, plants that are very specialized to surviving in anoxic water conditions. And so I set out to try and convey the information that is already there in the literature to landowners, to the people responsible for managing these wetlands in a simple way, using illustrations and real-world case studies. So there is a wealth of information out there on how wetlands work, how they function, how they should be managed, but it's always written for the wetland specialist or the practitioner. So with my co-authors, we set out to develop these guidelines. It took 2 years to actually develop. And we had a fantastic illustrator who was also a wetland ecologist who could convey a lot of these recommendations in the guidelines using illustrations. And so we're targeting landowners, farmers, traditional authorities, so rural communities, protected area managers, municipalities, and also the groups responsible for advising them, like NGOs. And so the scope of the guidelines comprises these high elevation systems. So wherever you see dark green, which is essentially 2 thresholds above 1,400 meters above sea level and above 700 millimeters per annum of rainfall. Yeah, so it doesn't only have application in South Africa, but the whole of Southern Africa, because we're dealing with similar ecosystem processes. The guidelines comprise 2 parts. First, wetland ecology, trying to give a basic understanding of how wetlands work so that you understand then the management recommendations. And so we focus more time on that within the guidelines. And then also for those who want to go the extra mile, we look at wetland conservation that you can do. And I'll be describing some of that, some of those as case studies as well in the presentation. And then also wetland support, so additional resources and who you can contact if you want to find out more. So we're very pleased. We published this earlier this year, and we have distributed them throughout the white-winged flufftail's distributional range. We have stewardship offices situated in communities all along the bird's distribution, which has really helped us to roll the guidelines out. We've also presented it at conferences, including the Ramsar Convention of Parties or Conference of Parties. And then we also we have workshops where we discuss the implementation of these guidelines as well. We've also translated it into several languages for Southern Africa to, again, just help with that adoption. And all of that is freely available. Right, wetland protection. So just to make you familiar with some of the stewardship mechanisms that we have in South Africa, we are able to declare nature reserves and protected environments. That's the 2 that we really focus on. And that gives us the highest level of protection from external threats like mining, We also have the highest level of landowner commitment for 99 years or 30 years at minimum. We also have a lot of state support and benefits that a landowner can receive. And so this is really the first level of trying to work with landowners, is trying to get that long-term commitment and legal protection so that the resources we invest into a site are protected in the long term. Right, so just wanted to display some of the protected areas that we've declared or are working on. And this is sort of the two sites that I'll be talking about as well during the presentation. So this blue is the distribution of the bird, and this is recent. You're one of the first people to be seeing this because we only had scattered records of the bird throughout South Africa, literally just a handful. But because of the research we've been able to do, and I'll talk about more about that, and the support that you have been able to provide, we've been able to find a lot more sites, and therefore we can do habitat suitability modeling, also known as species distribution modeling, and therefore predict where the bird is likely to occur based on coarse scale habitat requirements. And the two sites that we are focusing on for this talk is in the northern extent of the range. That's where we had the first breeding record of the bird in South Africa. And then also in the southern part of the range, where we have a community project. Right. We at the end of last year, we were able to declare the Tintilde and Davis Nature Reserve. That's this red block over here. Seemingly small, but really an important link that is going to continue to expand to link this purple nature reserve and this green over here. And white-winged flufftail have been recorded in both. So it's a really important in terms of forming a habitat corridor eventually, and a very, just expanding that whole protected area network. Really a stunning site and protecting a lot of water resources, as I mentioned, to many downstream users. We also looking at the Verloren Kloof Escarpment Nature Reserve, and this is going to protect a whole lot of indigenous forest, as well as the water that is coming off of the plateau. On the top of the plateau is where a lot of the wetlands are situated, where the white-winged flufftail is based, and that water then flows down the escarpment to feed major river systems. And so we're also looking at trying to protect that entire length of these river systems. And then we're also looking at engaging with farmers and declaring the Steenkampsberg protected environment. So a protected environment is one tier below a nature reserve, and that allows the farmer to continue to do their daily life practices without being impeded by legislation. They just need to do their actions or their management in line with promoting and sustaining the biodiversity that's on their property. So it's a fantastic initiative where people can still derive a livelihood from the land, and we can implement our conservation projects with them. Again, white-winged flufftail being found on several of these farms that we are looking at. Right, wetland stewardship. So declaration is the first step, but we don't just want to create paper parks, as we call it, just a name. We actually want to see conservation happening on the ground. And so this is the next step, is the actual stewardship, the post-declaration support. And there are various mechanisms in which we can provide that support. There's legal support, there's financial support, like tax rebates, and ecological support. And I'll be focusing on that for the rest of the talk. So we set out to really try to improve the extrinsic value that people can have for biodiversity on their land, as well as an intrinsic in terms of an appreciation for biodiversity. And so there were all these farm roads situated in the Steenkampsberg, which I pointed out, where the white-winged flufftail is also situated, wetlands, there's cranes, there's other birds. Fantastic. I think we have over or close to 400 species of bird just on this mountain range. And so we set out to try and formalize some birding routes on the plateau, and to really encourage people who are visiting to then feel safe and feel comfortable and able to explore some of these farmlands and to go and bird, essentially. So we erected signboards like this in the town of Dahlstrom, which is located centrally on the mountain range. And then we also have a QR code, which takes people to a web page. And there we have a whole lot of editable information. So species lists, places of stay that are also BirdLife friendly. and other services that they can use. And we can also track how many people have scanned the QR code. And so we've had nearly 1,500 people scan the QR code since the project launched in 2023. And that's just passive. That's no active marketing from our side. So it's really been encouraging to see people scanning and exploring some of these routes. And we had a lot of local business support for this. So it was clearly there was a need for it. And yeah, we have had several more places of stay join BirdLife South Africa's BirdLife friendly initiative for accommodation. So that therefore they're joining this birding network and they're seeing the value of AV tourism. Again, we also try to provide information that's out there in a concise and visually appealing way. So we create these infographics on various topics, things like using BirdLasser, which is our bird logging app, like eBird, iNaturalist, what is biodiversity stewardship, how does it work? And we're also addressing other very pertinent questions like what herbicides and insecticides to use to minimize impacts on birds and wetlands, especially wetlands, water. So a lot of this can carry on throughout the whole system. Fire and grazing, improving biodiversity on your land, human-wildlife conflict. So, wetlands pose very unique human-wildlife issues. The typical issues is the jackal eating my sheep, but we also have a lot of trout fishermen in the community. So there's a lot of predation on that from fish eagles, from cormorants, from otters. So how can we help them mitigate conflict with these species that are taking from their livelihood? We're also looking at using remote sensing to try and inform people and give them a different perspective on the land use or long-term trends of management practices on their land. So this is just some of the work we're doing where we're looking at moisture and how that changes throughout the year. And this blue part over here represents Middlepunt wetland, where the first breeding record of the white-winged flufftail was found. We've since declared the site a nature reserve, and we're very involved with trying to help the landowners manage the site. And there have been some wetland rehabilitation initiatives on the site, and we can see that the wetland is getting wetter and wetter over time, which is great for the white-winged flufftail. And then also in terms of community, so we don't just engage with private landowners or commercial farms, but we're also looking at helping community. So Insekeni Nature Reserve, so that's that site to the south that I showed on the map, is clearly a hotspot for white-winged flufftail. We're finding several pairs there, which is fantastic. But there's a lot of pressure that it faces. A lot of these reserves are located in very remote areas because it's on the top of mountain ranges. And the community is cutting down the fence, putting their cattle in the reserve, which is impacting the wetland and therefore the bird itself. And so we set out to establish this community project to try and help the relationship between the management authority of Insekeni Nature Reserve and the community. And so we have projects related to ecotourism, habitat restoration, and reserve infrastructure. So a lot of my work is focused inside the reserve. So we're looking at a community lodge and helping with the maintenance and hospitality of that lodge. And therefore, again, seeing the value of biodiversity for the communities because they can derive revenue from birding services. We've employed a community bird guide who takes people out. And again, yeah, they're just seeing the value of ecotourism. And then also outside the reserve, we have the Herding for Health program, and that's trying to give value to the community's livestock, helping them with the management of their lands so that they can keep the cattle in their lands because productivity from the grasslands is high. And so this has created jobs. We've been able to educate and uplift people. There's also been some eco-ranger training, so they act as monitors for the veld. They assist with planned burning instead of arson or wildfires. And we also were able to host a mobile cattle auction. So this is a community selling free-range organic cattle to markets and really seeing a high value return. Ultimately, this is reduced cattle in the reserve, which is, yeah, really just evidence of this project working. In terms of wetland policy and advocacy, we do comment on applications where there's developments that are threatening white-winged flufftail habitat. So this red is wetlands likely suitable for a white-winged flufftail. and we'll often get the scope area, and we try to mitigate those impacts or oppose it if it's just incompatible with white-winged flufftail. We also set out to develop guidelines for avifaunal consultants. So it's so difficult to survey this bird. So, avifaunal specialists who are doing the environmental impact assessment, how do they mitigate impacts to the white-winged flufftail? And so again, we designed these guidelines. We described the techniques and how you can actually monitor white-winged flufftail. And yeah, it's not only applicable to white-winged flufftail, it's applicable to that entire cryptic waterbird community that are using these high elevation wetlands. And then in terms of wetland awareness, we have the annual Flufftail Festival, which aligns with World Wetlands Day. And yeah, it's a fantastic day to really raise awareness for white-winged flufftail. There's, birds are charismatic. They act as fantastic ambassadors to raise awareness about wetlands and the importance of them for society. And we're really hoping to bring the Flufftail Festival to our stewardship site here in the Steenkampsberg next year. We've also designed 2 children's books, and these are also freely available as ebooks, so you can scan the QR code. We wrote 2 different books working with authors and illustrators for different age groups. The first follows this bird called Sorrow, after the species name, who's learning how to fly, and he goes on an adventure with his friends, a wattled crane and a Cape clawless otter, and they encounter issues in the wetland and how to overcome that. And then also a more sort of birding related book. It follows 2 Biffy and Zenzi go birding. It follows 2 poodles going birding for the first time with their owners, and they go birding to aquatic ecosystems, so an open water body system and a wetland system. And I'm sure you can guess what it concludes with in terms of what they see. Right, and then just to end off with research, and this is where the African Bird Club support. So I was able to receive a grant from you in the early years of this project back in 2020 when we first established it. In fact, I think ABC was one of the first funders. And this really helped me to then start doing the research that we needed to at a much wider scale within South Africa. Over the last 5 years, we've sampled over 60 sites with the acoustic devices on private and state land. We've found 20 new sites with white-winged flufftail, which is remarkable given that there were only maybe 5 known. And this has helped us to then develop population estimates and do a breeding distribution map based on habitat suitability modeling. As a result, South Africa reviewed the regional threat status of its birds this year. And I'm very pleased to say that the bird has been uplisted from critically endangered to endangered. And this is all thanks to the research that you have been able to support. So thank you. We now have a better understanding of the bird's situation, and this is as a result of improved knowledge. It doesn't mean that we're doing better with our wetlands. We still need to conserve those and still do better. Endangered still means threatened. But the fact that the bird is no longer as dire as we thought, really helps us in our decision making and how we use our resources. So where to next? We want to expand our surveys within South Africa and then also within Southern Africa. So we're looking at other neighboring countries. There's rumors, there's records from, like 2 records from Zimbabwe back in the 70s. So really we need to get into those high elevation systems and explore and see where the bird is. We also want to, because we have those camera traps, those motion detected cameras, we have fantastic records of breeding and breeding behavior. So we want to describe that and publish that, as well as looking at the fine scale habitat requirements. And that again feeds into the management guidelines. Again, we have no idea where the bird goes in winter. We want to discover where the overwintering grounds are. And technology is really helping us as it advances to develop tracking devices light enough to go onto a 30-gram bird. And all of this is going to inform the revision of the AWA International Single Species Action Plan for the white-winged flufftail. It was published in 2008, so this is an action plan that helps conserve the bird across nations who are contracting parties to the African Eurasian Migratory Waterbird Agreement. And it's coming up for review after 20 years, and all of this information is going to feed into that and help with our conservation efforts going forward. We're also looking at fundraising next year, having the Kruger Birding and Wildlife Challenge. And so I thought I'll just take this opportunity to share that with you. If you would like to enter and join us, we would welcome you. It's 10 days in Kruger National Park. So that's our very famous national park in South Africa. It's for 10 days, touring from the north to the south. So you'll get to see the entirety of the reserve. And it's essentially a challenge to who can see the most birds. So you'll join a team and yeah, go birding essentially every day. And then there's also a category for other wildlife, so mammals and things like that. But all of the funds, all of the profits that are raised from this funding event go back into white-winged flufftail conservation. So if you're interested, please contact Rockjumper Birding Tours. The email address is at the bottom, tailormade@rockjumper.com, and we'd love to have you there. Yeah, so just to say thank you. As I said, you were one of the first funders for this project. You helped give it the momentum it needs. All of that, you see, all of that has been achieved just because of your funding and support. So thank you.
Kyle, thank you very much. That was so impressive, really clear as well, which is nice. I'll kick off with a couple of questions, if I may. Can I suggest we stop sharing the screen so we can now see everyone? That's great. So I remember, obviously, they were seen in Ethiopia a few times, and then I think they were rediscovered in Ethiopia a couple of times. Anybody working on them in Ethiopia at the moment?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a sad story, that one. My colleagues were able to do a sort of review of the white-winged flufftail's distribution and locality in Ethiopia in 2019. And they found that only one site remained suitable, Berger Wetland. Unfortunately, the other sites, with the expanding human population and encroachment of livestock in wetlands, has really degraded the wetlands in that area. It's essentially one dairy farm that is protecting this wetland at Berger Wetland, that's keeping the birds there. There's only enough habitat to support, I think, 50 breeding pairs at most. So the situation is very dire in Ethiopia. We have really tried our best to work with our partners there, but the civil unrest is preventing them from even accessing the site. Unfortunately, there's kidnappings en route to the site, and that has really hampered us knowing what's the situation and implementing any conservation efforts there. So that AWA revision of that International Single Species Action Plan, we will have our Ethiopian colleagues, and hopefully we can make something more concrete and final in what we can do for that site.
Thank you. Well, that's a bit depressing, but thank you for explaining it. And just another quick one before I hand over to others. I remember that mining was thought to be one of the biggest threats at some point, but I didn't feel that came from your talk. So is it really farming rather than mining that's the issue?
Yeah, so I think the reason that in my talk I focus so much on farming is, we see a farm, there's a wetland there, so surely things must be fine and rosy. But yes, mining is still a major threat. We're constantly fighting applications, but that's why the nature reserve status and protected environment is so key, because it prevents those land use activities in South Africa. But yes, we really wanted to work with farmers because most of the wetlands that are still available for white-winged flufftail are on private land. They're not situated in nature reserves. So we really, in terms of the future for the species, those are the key landowners that we need to work with. And so that's why getting the management right is so important. These sedge meadows are very easily replaced if there's a disturbance in the catchment. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Right. Any questions from anyone around the table? Yes, I see John Caddick there. Please unmute yourself and fire away.
Hello, Kyle. Can you hear?
I can hear. Hello.
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. Really interesting.
Thank you.
Just a little bit more information relating to Keith's question about Ethiopia. I keep a lot of bird records, but my understanding was, at least historically, there were records of the bird between South Africa and Ethiopia, and at times it was thought to be maybe that was its wintering ground, if you like. in Ethiopia. Has anybody been back and checked those records and is now assumed that it's a completely different population in Ethiopia to the South African population? And I guess the final point is, as the person who sort of hosts all the photographs for African bird species, we would love one of your photographs of white-winged flufftail, if that's at all possible.
No, I'd be happy to share that. Thank you. No, definitely. Yes, yeah. So as you mentioned, the previous hypothesis before the breeding record in South Africa was that South Africa was the overwintering ground of the white-winged flufftail. But now we know that from all our camera trap work that the bird is a regular breeder in South Africa. That record wasn't an anomaly. And I've also been able to see evidence of chicks at multiple locations in South Africa. So we do suspect that it's two separate breeding populations, and that that there could be some genetic mixing, because there has been a genetics paper, although the sample size was very small, and they didn't find any differences. So there could be, along that eastern escarpment or that eastern highlands, that there is some mixing of the species, and so that's certainly something that we want to set out and do for the future of our work. Is get into Zimbabwe, get to Malawi, and explore and see if the bird is there. Yeah, even Tanzania.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions? I've got a quick one just whilst anyone's thinking. I remember going with John Caddick actually probably 10 years ago to Wakkerstroom. And I remember we were being told about how that's the place where they used to drag the rope across the top of the reeds and the flufftails would fly. And it was a once a year thing, and it helped to identify how many birds there were. I believe that was stopped due to being disturbance and not good practice, but presumably it did have some benefits too, because you could cover some really hard habitat. What do you use now? Do you use drones and things like that with thermal images?
Yeah, so we use entirely passive monitoring equipment. So those motion detected cameras and the acoustic devices. And we've also been able to develop what we call camera trap tunnels. It's essentially a metal frame that makes like a tunnel shape with shade cloth on the side, and that mimics that three-dimensional structure of the understory of the wetlands. And that has dramatically increased our detection rates of birds going through. And so we're able to see birds in situ basically within the wetland ecosystem. So yeah, there was definitely a huge value in the rope drags, also from fundraising aspect and an awareness aspect. And we are looking at ways of trying to view the bird ethically. But yeah, it's everything about this bird is a challenge, and we have such a narrow window within its breeding season to actually work with it. But yeah, we're using essentially acoustics and camera traps now.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick on Richard Webb because he put his hand up earlier to say he'd seen the bird. But Richard, were you one of those lucky people who happened to be around when they dragged a rope? You'll need to unmute, Richard.
I was sat in a hide at Wakkerstroom, and there was a otter or a serval or something going through the reeds and the undergrowth, and suddenly it flushed a flufftail out, and it flew about 20 meters and landed again. And I remember seeing Dion Kurtzier or speaking to him on the phone that night, and he was thoroughly gripped to the extent that he came down the following day to try and look for it himself.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great opportunity to see it. Wow.
Thanks for sharing that, Richard. Hilary, I can see Hilary McBean, you've got a question. You're going to probably ask about Rwanda, aren't you?
No, I'm not going to ask about Rwanda. I'm going to ask about acoustics, because that's very much our working area. You mentioned during the talk there that the call of the white-winged flufftail had been described, so you were able to apply the remote acoustic devices. This is a really key issue for expanding exploration of areas and particularly threatened species. Can you tell us how you acquired the initial recordings and how many you had in order to apply it to your remote sensors, please?
Sure. Yeah, so it wasn't myself who recorded it, but my colleagues, and they did that in Ethiopia. The nature of the wetland makes the bird a lot more visible and more readily flushes. So they were able to, see the bird and actually, have a recorder and record it. And then since then, I have done that myself within South Africa. So it's essentially a lot of mornings just getting up and recording those calls, standing in the wetlands. The bird is crepuscular in its activity, so mornings and evenings. And yeah, essentially, it took 3 years really to build up a database to then be able to train a classifier for our acoustic devices. So it took a lot of hard work to develop enough training, and the call had to be clear. There couldn't be a testicular, calling over white-winged flufftail or a red-chested flufftail. So yeah, it took a while to actually develop a library essentially to train the model.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Hilary, were you continuing there?
Yeah, so I'd like to just ask, you started off in Ethiopia, obviously you've got some data from there. Did you find the calls and songs, if you got a song, were the same in South Africa? Because over a range like that, you might expect quite a difference.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to explore. From with the ear, I can't hear any differences, but we definitely want to looking at maybe some subtle signatures that differ, or some parameters that differ between the two populations. So yeah, that's definitely something that I want to look at.
Could I indulge another question, please?
Go ahead.
Is that too much? Thank you. Just turning to the community around these grasslands and trying to make an impression about the importance of wildlife in the grasslands with the communities. Have you you produce some nice materials, really nice materials for children, but have you engaged those communities in active citizen science, going out and birding themselves, potentially recording themselves, but really getting them engaged in the wildlife of the area?
Yeah, so that's something we really want to do with the Flufftail Festival, as I say, coming to my area this June comes back, because it always happened in South Africa's capital. But that's not really the people who have the bird on their doorstep. So that's why we really want to bring them. We developed those books. The books have also been made into audiobooks, so we can share that with them. And part of that activity will involve birding. BirdLife South Africa also has a community bird guide project. So we take representatives from the community, upskill them to become bird guides, and they really act as ambassadors within the community to see that there's value out of ecotourism and engaging with nature.
Yes,
Brilliant.
this does seem to be becoming the working model to get critical mass of activity and interest and passion for biodiversity underway in communities. Yeah, thank you. That's good news.
Thanks, Hilary. Great questions. Lincoln Fishbowl.
Thank you. And thank you, Kyle. That is really encouraging. There's a transformational understanding of the bird since I was involved in conservation professionally. Question though, from your habitat modelling, you showed a fairly extensive area that is a potentially suitable habitat, and I think you said you'd surveyed 60 sites and you'd found positive records at 20. It's not really clear how much of that total area you have yet to has been surveyed and what remains to be surveyed. Do you have an estimate of what the potential total South African population could be? I mean, ballpark, a range. Do you have an estimate? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. With the regional IUCN assessment or review of the bird's threat status, we're able to come up with 1,800 mature individuals with trying to calculate the home range of the bird using the camera trap models, and then the total number of hectares within the bird's breeding distribution or predicted, and then just extrapolating that basically to how many breeding pairs can be supported. So I am doing the proper analysis, going through the peer review process in terms of developing the robust models, and so that will hopefully be updated, but the value I think is going to remain very much the same. Yeah, and that map I showed was very generalized. high elevation wetlands are really fragmented across that range. So there will only be a few wetlands within that blue space that I showed. Yeah.
Well, there aren't that many additional sites yet to be surveyed then, is that in South Africa? Is that what you mean?
Oh no, there are quite a few more sites. Yeah, no, there's quite a few, and particularly to the south. So I've stopped in where that Insekeni location was, but there's a whole frontier basically to explore into the south of South Africa. It leaves the Drakensberg Mountains and becomes the Amatoli Mountains. So it's a whole new mountain range that runs from east to west as opposed to north to south.
Great, go. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Fish. Any more questions? I have a quick one. I think it was David Attenborough who said, how can you expect people to want to save a species unless they can see it? What is the likelihood that somebody who cares about a bird like this could actually see it? Is it something you think you'll be able to introduce people to over the years? And a certain amount of self-interest, of course, built into that question, which I will declare straight away. But I'm sure many of us around this table, as it were, would love to see that bird. What's the view of that going forward?
No, that's definitely a view we share. We want people to care about the bird, and that's only through emotions and experiences that you have with it. So we are working hard on trying to provide an ethical way of viewing the bird. We're working with a community bird guide. I can't go into too much details just because of the threat status of the species, but essentially we're trying to habituate the bird to a baiting station, but situated within the wetland. So you're basically getting a view within the sedge meadow and you can see the bird feed there. So we have had some promising results from last season, but yeah, the bird is so, you picture a wetland, as water's levels rise throughout the season, it's moving and changing its territory. So the home range of the bird is actually massive because it has to locate its niche, which is a very specialized narrow niche throughout this big system. So it's really hard to habituate a pair and get them to keep on coming throughout the wet season, when you could just have one big rainfall event and they've moved to a different water gradient or water level. So there are challenges, but yeah, also with the remote sensing or the camera traps, trying to share those images and videos. So yeah.
Superb. Well, birds are birds and they're free to roam. If there are any quick questions, put your hand up. Otherwise, I will close and thank Kyle. Thank you very much. So glad that ABC was able to be involved at an early stage in this project, and I'm sure in the future we'll be interested to see not only how it goes, but also if there are funding opportunities where we could really make a difference and fit in. So thank you. On behalf of everybody, please clap and show your appreciation